Hey, what's going on? Jeff Ratcliffe here. In an era where the NFL has become increasingly pass happy, the Baltimore Ravens bucked the trend last year and averaged 34.2 rushing attempts per game. We expect a lot more run out of the Ravens this year. So what do they look like for fantasy football purposes in 2019? Let's break down their outlook. Let's start with Lamar Jackson, of course, had 148 rushing attempts on his own, which is saying something because this guy didn't take over as the starter until week 11. On the season, leads all quarterbacks in rushing yards with 693 and adds 6 touchdowns to boot on the ground. We know Lamar's not going to do a ton with his arm, and really for fantasy purposes, that isn't the end of the world. The era of the drop back passer dominating in fantasy scoring, that's in the rear view at this point. The modern fantasy football quarterback adds a lot of value with his legs, and certainly Lamar does that. Remember, every 40 rushing yards is the same amount of fantasy points as a passing touchdown in most of your scoring systems where you're getting 4 points for those passing touchdowns. So the fact that Lamar, we could see him this season, I don't think he, down the stretch he did average over 17 carries a game, which is outrageous for a quarterback. He's not going to average that this season. But does Lamar approach 200 carries? He very well might. We could see him in the 180 to 200 carry range. And if he does that and he really racks up the yards this season, we could be talking about Lamar Jackson knocking on the door of QB1 territory. Now, of course, there's a lot of risk with Lamar. Let's not beat around the bush with that. His deficiencies as a passer, we saw them last season. Hopefully he takes a little bit of a step forward there this year. But that can be a problem. The nice thing, though, is as he showed at the end of last season, he brings a nice high floor with his ability as a runner. So you're not going to have to pay QB1 price for him. You're not going to have to pay a top 12 price for him. He'll probably be around in the late rounds of your draft, which is an optimal guy to really take a swing for the fences for you. You have a lot of upside in Lamar Jackson this year, even though he's not going to put up major numbers as a passer. Of course, joining him on the ground in Baltimore is going to be Mark Ingram. Now he's finally out of New Orleans. It seemed like every year in New Orleans, Mark Ingram was sort of sharing the backfield with somebody. Over the last 2 years, of course, that somebody has been Alvin Kamara. And we saw Kamara just take the league by storm. So Ingram is out of there. We don't have to worry about him splitting carries there, but he is basically going to be splitting carries with Lamar Jackson. So don't expect Ingram to just step in and get close to 300 carries. That's not what we're going to see here. There's a little bit of a cap in terms of the volume share. But the nice thing about Ingram is he can catch the ball out of the backfield. Now, the team did draft Justice Hill, who can do some of that on his own. Kenneth Dixon is still there. We're not going to see any of Gus Edwards catching the ball out of the backfield, but he could end up spelling Ingram a little bit. So there's a lot of mouths to feed there. I think that ultimately puts a little bit of a cap on Ingram's fantasy upside, as does the fact that, he's 30 years old now, which in real life is not very old at all, but in football, if you're a running back, that's getting up there. That's a little over the hill. So you have to view Ingram, I think, more as an RB2 option. I don't think he's going to flirt with RB1 numbers this year, but at least he is in this run-heavy system, so there should be enough opportunities for him to sustain RB2 value. At wide receiver, it's going to be a little tricky because, as I mentioned, Lamar Jackson's passing deficiencies, that can be a little bit problematic. Willie Snead is going to enter the season very likely as their number one. There's not enough fantasy upside there to really justify, going all in on Willie Snead. I will say, though, we have to keep an eye on these rookies. So the team drafts Hollywood Brown, Marquis Brown, who's an exciting player, one of the most dynamic players in college last year. Doesn't have the size, doesn't have like NFL size, but it really doesn't necessarily matter. I don't know if, being a big body receiver in today's NFL is as important as maybe it once was, especially when you're as dynamic a player as Marquis Brown. So we'll keep an eye on his development this year. He could potentially surface on the fantasy radar. And then, of course, Miles Boykin out of Notre Dame, who also can flat out fly. He's an extremely gifted athlete, showed it at the Combine, was off the charts from a testing standpoint in basically every single event at the NFL Combine this year. A little bit more raw, but in the same right, you can't teach that athleticism. But the thing that he has that Brown doesn't have is he does have that size. So you have two guys who can certainly get downfield, one smaller, one bigger, for Lamar Jackson to grow with. This is a good situation over the long term. I just don't know if there's going to be a lot of fantasy value to be had in the short term. If you're looking for value in the passing game, I think that Mark Andrews might be your best bet. The young tight end last year. Okay, rookie tight ends don't necessarily put up the biggest numbers. It's really rare to see a rookie enter the league at the position and be a viable fantasy option. And Andrews really wasn't last year. He surfaced a couple times throughout the course of the season. But when you look back on the season, he had 552 receiving yards. That's not an enormous total or anything along those lines. But it is one of those where you kind of just take a moment to take stock of it and say, hey, there's something here. And the team, of course, did draft Hayden Hurst as well to go along with Andrews. But if you're looking at which one of these two has more potential for fantasy purposes to break out this year, it's definitely Andrews. He showed at the college level, he was basically a wide receiver playing tight end. He's a gigantic wide receiver, essentially, with his skills. So he's a guy who really fits well, especially if you think, Lamar Jackson is going to be targeting the tight end a lot. We've seen that historically in Baltimore's offense anyway. Mark Andrews could be really interesting. I don't know if he's a late round dart. I don't even think you really have to draft him, but have him on your list of tight end streamers for the early season and keep an eye on his production. You want to see where these guys fall in our rankings? You can check all of those out and more over at ProFootballFocus.com.